Thank you. Thank you. Just to be clear, I'm Chaz, that's Cecelia, and I'm going to be talking about the publisher perspective.
I'm the brand.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah.
That's us. I can move beyond that. So there are going to be three things in particular, three themes that are going to be running through what we talk about today, and hopefully in the questions that you ask. The first one is about attention, using live storytelling as a mechanism to capture and hold on to attention. Second thing is what happens with memory and recall when you create an event that's special and ephemeral, an event that's not necessarily going to live on YouTube. And the third thing we're going to talk about is how do you bring together live storytelling and branded content into something new and powerful. So So Pop-Up Magazine Productions, for those of you who don't know, is a company that makes a weekend magazine called the California Sunday Magazine, and we make a live show called Pop-Up Magazine. And with everything we do, we like our mission is to kind of go out into the world and find stories that you've never heard, craft them in ways that we hope you'll never forget, and in the process change how we all see the world. Pop-Up Magazine, which is it's not really a magazine at all. It takes place inside a theater. It's inspired by the structure and shape of a magazine, but it's turned into three dimensions. It's a collection of stories by nonfiction storytellers, journalists, filmmakers, writers, radio people, all set to animation and film and live music. Are there, I can't totally see out there, but anybody in the audience been to Pop-Up Magazine before? Do we have any? Oh, yay, all right, good. I feel like we always get more hands on the West Coast because we're based in San Francisco. But what Pop-Up Magazine, I'll tell, for those of you who aren't here, I'll tell you a little bit about it. Let me first just show you a little trailer for some of the new folks as to what it is. So I'll talk for a second about some of the elements that make it up and how we approach this live storytelling approach in a minute. But Cecelia, I'm biased. This is, like I'm always going to say nice things about it. But you're on the outside. You've been to the show.
Yes, absolutely. It's a really one-of-a-kind experience. I was actually telling Chaz before we were in here that I was at Pop-Up Magazine in Oakland on Saturday night with like 8 or 10 friends who'd never been before. I would say very diverse tastes when it comes to content and films and books and things like that. So I kept like peeking down the road, like what's everyone thinking? And across the board, like people were hysterically laughing, and then 30 minutes later, in tears, and it's just like such a moving experience, and a really kind of special moment to be part of.
Oh, good. Yeah. Thank you. I set her up to do that. I made her do that. I'll show you just kind of like breaking it down into five component parts of Pop-Up Magazine, just to give you a sense of it. The first one is that it's an evening where storytellers are performing their own original works live on stage, and so it's an evening of like part of the work that we are doing at Pop-Up Magazine is reaching out into the culture to find amazing storytellers, people who are working in magazines, working in radio and podcasting, working in film, working in photography, to help us find stories. And then the second part of Pop-Up Magazine is the stories themselves. So everything that is happening at Pop-Up Magazine is a new original story. It's never been seen before, screened before, played before on the radio. So it's all brand new stuff that is debuting live at the show. And when we use the word story, it's in the sense of a magazine story. So they're mostly reported pieces where the person on stage is playing the role of journalist. They're generally not telling just a funny thing that happened to them, but rather taking you out into the world, and there are other characters in that story. The third thing is that Pop-Up Magazine is very multimedia. It's multimedia in two ways. One is, as I mentioned before, the performers come from different media backgrounds. So some people are very comfortable in the world of radio and podcasting, others are photographers, others are filmmakers, and so there's a kind of a texture to the media itself. And the other way that it's multimedia is what you're looking at here on the stage is I guess it's to the far right as you guys are looking. That's a guy named Donald Mosher. He's an award-winning filmmaker. He's standing at a music stand. The performers are coming out to the stage with a script, and they're on a stage where at the other side there's a band live scoring their work. And the main thing that you're looking at is this giant screen above them where we have film and animation and illustration punctuating the story. And there's a dancer on stage in this one too. I'll tell you more about that kind of stuff. The third thing about Pop-Up Magazine is, I said before, we're inspired by our favorite magazines. And so the pieces at the front of a Pop-Up Magazine show are like front of the book. They're shorter, they're funnier, they're more accessible, and then we get into longer features. And just like other magazines that we read, in between the editorial stories are moments of advertising, a display spread in between them. So as we built Pop-Up Magazine, we tried to figure out what would that look like live on stage. And so what we found is, probably many of you in the room work at brands and work at agencies, and probably you don't have somebody that you work with who makes the live magazine activation for your brand, and you're not alone. So we've built an in-house studio at Pop-Up Magazine so that brands that want to sponsor the show work with us, and we help develop their brand into an interesting experience at the show. And Cecelia and I are going to talk more about some of those things later, but it's everything from, we're looking at sort of a postcard campaign that we did with an Amazon Studios campaign. We've done skits on stage, we've developed short films, we've had liquor sponsors where we mix a cocktail on stage and serve it after the show. So it's a really fun, integrated component to what Pop-Up Magazine is. And the last thing about it is Pop-Up Magazine happens in giant theaters. So we'll be here in New York in 2 weeks. We'll be at Lincoln Center at the David Geffen Hall over there. When we're in Brooklyn, we do the Opera House. And so these are theaters with 2,000 to 3,000 people in them. And it's really fun to be in a room with 2,000, 3,000 other people in the dark with our phones off, enjoying stories together. And it creates, I think, an energy that's wonderful in every story. And it also creates opportunities for us to interact with audiences in a way that you can't on a phone or you can't in a print magazine. And a couple examples of that, this is a woman named Brittany Spanos, who's a writer for Rolling Stone magazine. She pitched us a story about, she'd been interviewing the owners of karaoke bars about the worst karaoke songs of all time. And so it was this reported piece, but she didn't really know what to do with it. And so we worked with her to kind of create it as a top 10 countdown list of the worst karaoke songs of all time, according to karaoke bar owners. And we sort of realized, we're like, you know what, we have a band on stage and we have 3,000 people that I bet some of them will sing. And so you can see the graphics behind her are designed to look like a janky karaoke machine with the bouncing ball. And so when she got to the final worst story of all time in karaoke, which obviously is Don't Stop Believing by Journey, she's like, yeah, I know, but I love it too. What do you say? Let's never do it at a karaoke bar again, but just one more time tonight. And the band just rolled and we had 3,000 people singing karaoke together. That was a lot of fun. This is a picture of the printed program, and what you can see in there is a little plastic bag with 2 small marshmallows in it. This was a story by the food writer and television personality Samin Nosrat. She pitched us a story about how conflict and sanctions can not only disrupt the flow of human refugees, but they also disrupt the food chain. And so you can kind of taste conflict around the world on your plate if you know what to look for. And the 2 marshmallows were spiced with 2 different kinds of cinnamon. So most of us in this room grew up much of our lives for 50 years in the United States because of the Vietnam War and the sanctions that followed. You couldn't get Vietnamese cinnamon, which is what like our grandparents grew up eating. So we were all eating cinnamon that came from southern India, and it tastes different. And so as she was telling this story, we invited the audience to tear open these little bags, and she told us when to eat the white one and when to eat the pink one. And it was a fun experience of getting to kind of taste along with journalism. So that's kind of what we're able to do. And I'm going to pass the clicker over to you to talk a little bit about your world. My world.
So I lead Google's brand editorial efforts, and we tell stories. We tell stories about human ingenuity and really what people are doing, how they're changing the world in completely unexpected ways using Google's technology. So I work with journalists and filmmakers. I work with writers and marketers, and our team actually owns kind of the end-to-end process, if you will, of finding a story, building the narrative, producing the story, and then distributing it. So bringing it to life across a variety of channels and mediums. And so many of our stories come to life a lot of different ways. We have editorial stories, we have films, social stories, et cetera. But despite narrative insight or format, et cetera, all of our stories really come back to kind of this core human element. Telling stories about people, people that as a team we've met and gotten to know really well and built kind of really deep relationships with. And they've invited us into their journey, which has been really powerful. And then thinking of ways to tell their story and bring it to the world through all of these different storytelling formats. And really kind of the best example of this over the past several years has been our original documentary series that we call Search On. So this is actually a 9-part documentary series that you can watch online. Each one is a short film, anywhere between 2 and 7 or 8 minutes or so. And each one is about a different individual who there was something about the world that was unsatisfactory to them. There was, they couldn't accept the status quo. So what they did was they made a huge difference and made a change using Google technology. We have a story about a 13-year-old scientist who used Android to be able to identify lead in water and then bring that to different communities across the country, which is really powerful. We have a story about a dad in New Zealand who used YouTube to learn to make prosthetics for his daughter. So people who just have kind of taken these everyday products and done really powerful things for their local communities or for the larger world. But really, again, what does all of this come back to? And for us, it's the story of people. It's how different people are making an impact. And that's really kind of our storytelling philosophy, is leaning into these individuals' journeys and narratives and how we can bring that to the world.
I mean, it's something that when Cecelia and I have known each other for a while, we've been working together for a bit. And one of the things that the Pop-Up Magazine team noticed as we got together is that we end up sharing a lot of the same language. That it's sort of,
absolutely.
It's stories that are told through people, it's stories that have narrative arcs, and you'll see that in some of the stuff that we'll show you in a second. That's so wonderful. I think it's sort of allowed for us to connect in some ways.
Yes.
So that was what we saw in you immediately. What was it about Pop-Up Magazine as a format that was interesting to your team?
Yeah. So while we are storytellers, and I work with many storytellers, we are Google, so we are also data folks. And so our team has done a ton of exploration around content consumption and how people experience stories, how people engage with storytelling. And after many research studies and pilots and different opportunities, one of the things that we've identified as a concept is this thing that we call the storytelling mindset. And it's pretty simple. It sounds like what it is, and that's that people connect more deeply with stories and with our stories and narrative, and at kind of a different emotional level when two things are true. The first thing is they're ready to consume a story, right? You're not surprising them in an environment when they're not ready to receive or consume kind of one of these powerful narratives. And the second is when we can really create space for them to watch these stories all the way through to the end. So it's not necessarily about, a quick, I watch the 30 seconds and then it's there. No, how can we really kind of create that time and environment for them to watch all the way through? And that's kind of the sweet spot for us, is when we can find that storytelling mindset, you have a deeper emotional connection to the story and to the brand. And we actually also see lift metrics for the brand across the board. So that was one of the really kind of exciting opportunities about Pop-Up Magazine. Obviously, as you said, we share so many kind of like shared perspectives about how we do storytelling, but then also coming back to this opportunity to lean into that.
Yeah. There's something I want to. This idea of the storytelling mindset is I think is very interesting. We probably all, in our different ways, think about that, like kind of thinking about the context in which we deliver what kinds of messages, what kinds of stories, and the gift that you have in certain formats, like and even for those of you who still read magazines on paper, that there's an orientation we bring to that when we open a magazine. Our expectation for how a story will unfold is quite different than when we're reading something on Instagram. And so thinking about, we think a lot about sort of programming to the moment that you're talking to someone, and finding those places where you have an opportunity to kind of let a story naturally build. And we even before we started working together, Cecelia and I started working together, other parts of Google have been longtime supporters and sponsors of Pop-Up Magazine. And Google Play, which is the music and games and movie service, worked with us a couple of years ago, back when their tagline was "Play Your Heart Out." It was all about entertainment as inspiration to do something more. And so we collaborated on an idea that we called California Inspires Me. And the team at Pop-Up Magazine went out to iconic entertainers like Rashida Jones and James Franco and Reggie Watts and Jack Black and others, and kind of gave them room to tell their own inspiration stories. Like what was the music, what were the TV shows that kind of propelled you on your course? And we built these short animated films that are narrated by those people. And it was fun. We're gonna test my technical chops here. I wanna see if I can play one.
Yeah, I'm from the South, from the deep, deep south of Southern California. I grew up in Hermosa Beach, California, which means beautiful beach. I was a little bit of a fish out of water,
I don't know,
because it's a Southern California beach town,
and
and you know, the stereotypical...
Oh, yeah, all right, great. I won't make you watch the whole thing, but it was fun. So we're doing this thing with Jack Black, and we weren't inviting him in to make a TV commercial with us. We were inviting him in to tell stories about himself and the entertainment experience that was important to Google Play. And these stories are such fun. Like they kind of, these celebrities that we know from TV and movies were revealing parts of themselves that were funny, that were endearing, that were intimate, that were unexpected and delightful. And in this film, when we were interviewing Jack Black, at one point in the interview, he just started singing. He started singing "Fly Like an Eagle." I don't know anybody old enough in the room to know that song. And it was just like we were so happy. We're like, here we have this crazy interview and we have Jack Black sort of singing along. And it created this opportunity for us to use that tape at the end of the film to roll with the credits to take people out of the show. And it was just, it was a kind of experience that if we were worried that audiences weren't going to make it to the end of a 3.5-minute experience, we would have had to design the piece differently. And so knowing that we were programming to people in this storytelling mindset allowed us to do some really fun stuff. I'm not going to play it for you. Follow up with me afterwards if you need to see the whole film. Another group at Google was Google Pixel, which is, you all know Google Pixel. And when the Pixel 3 was launching, it was the best camera on the market, quite significantly. And Pixel wanted an opportunity to let people kind of feel closer to photography, closer to professional photography, and realize that with the right tools, they could get a lot closer to that themselves. And so we, at California Sunday, we were doing a photo issue of a print magazine, but because we also do a live show, we're like, why don't we launch this issue in a way that allows our readers to actually walk inside the photo essays? And so we launched the magazine. If you're looking in the upper right-hand corner, that's Aperture in Chelsea, the photo gallery downtown. And we turned a magazine issue into a gallery exhibit there that then toured on to LA and other places. And it was this moment where we could bring people together, bring them inside, a live experience inside an issue. And then we worked with Pixel to kind of build, as you're walking into the gallery, a photo exhibit of Pixel users and their photography that was hanging on the walls alongside some of the most prominent photographers in the culture. And so there are lots of different ways that we can do that. And so I wanted to now sort of dive into some of the work that we've been doing with your Search On films.
Absolutely. So earlier I mentioned our Search On documentary series, which for us has really been kind of at the heart of our storytelling efforts as a brand at Google. I think that it's been the program that's taught us the most about how to create, and it's probably been the program that we've experimented with the most as well, which is how we kind of started this opportunity with Pop-Up. So I think today we're actually going to share with you one of our very first episodes called Bike Around, which is about a researcher in Sweden who is supporting dementia patients in some really unique ways.
And one thing I just want to say before this, like, so these films in this film series are just, they're wonderful. You're going to see one right now. And so, like, they're built for, where are most people watching these? Online often?
Yeah, so the core of where they're built for is on YouTube. So you can kind of see they're built out as a complete series on YouTube. But again, the storytelling mindset is not always as strong in a format like that. And so that was part of the opportunity to look for a new place to share these. We also share them on Google's About site. So if you go to Google's About site, the whole kind of series lives as a collection.
Cool. I
Yeah.
think one's fired up here.
Mitt namn är Bengt Ivarsson.
Bengt har ju blivit lite dålig på att komma ihåg. Vad fick vi till middag på bröllopet?
Ja, jag kommer inte ihåg.
Vi fick kalkon.
Var det kalkon?
Ja. Ja, jag förstår ju att han kommer att bli sämre i sin sjukdom.
When you're suffering from dementia, you lose your memory and you need a lot of support. Often you need support from your relatives. It's really hard to be a relative to someone that suffers from dementia. So we had this vision that we wanted to use technology and develop the bike around system for elderly people. The bike around system is a bike where you can go wherever you want to go together with Google Street View. We wanted it to be as realistic as possible.
Så du får ut och cykla idag? Ja.
Mostly they want to go back where they grew up. It's also where they have most memory.
Och där ligger gården som farmor ägde.
You have a moment where you're not suffering from memory loss.
Där är vi på väg.
Vi är på väg mot Troda.
Det var då du var där, träffade Laila första gången.
Och sa, kommer Laila, den ska jag gifta mig med, så. Och hon var så vacker.
Hur känns det att vara tillbaka här nu då?
Och det känns det lite varstans.
This was supposed to be like a prototype and something that we could discuss around. And now it's a product that actually is affecting people's lives.
Yeah.
So that, like when we were looking at that film, I don't know how you guys all liked it, but I always get a little teary looking at that. I think it's just such a powerful story, and then the challenge came to us at Pop-Up Magazine of how do we liveify what the work that Cecelia and her team have been doing. And so we took a look at that sort of such great foundational material with these films to deliver to people in storytelling, in a story mindset. And what we decided to do to kind of bring it to 11 was Ann-Christine Hertz, who's the Swedish scientist in the film, we together reached out to her to see if she would be willing to come on tour with us on Pop-Up Magazine and personally introduce the film to audiences. And so we worked with her to tell audiences kind of how she got into the work, and it was the story of her own family and dementia in her own family that isn't the kind of thing that she's putting in films that are all over the internet, but in a live setting, she felt comfortable sharing that information with the audience, and to hear that just sort of like elevated the emotional experience that we did, and it was I think it was a real gift to our audiences at Pop-Up Magazine, and Anne Christine seemed to have a great time. Like she's a scientist working in Sweden, and she was getting treated like a rock star. You know, you're like, she's at Lincoln Center and like presenting to thousands and thousands of people. And as she, at the end of the Pop-Up Magazine shows, as we all kind of meet in the lobbies and have a drink together, she was being surrounded by people who wanted to share stories and connect with her. And she talked about how it made the work feel different to her, that it was something kind of special. And certainly our audiences were telling us that this, you know, quote unquote sponsored programming from Google inside the show was one of the most emotionally rich parts of the whole evening.
Yeah, I think it was, again, kind of the challenge to find this right opportunity to share these stories with the world was something we thought about a lot as a team. And Pop-Up Magazine it offered a format that kind of solves for that in a way that no other partner really could. So, and the live format is really kind of the biggest piece of that. So as Chaz said, we went to him and we said, we've got this story, we know it's super powerful, but we want to think of new ways for it to connect with people. And he obviously shared of how it came to life. And I think it just was like an unparalleled activation for us in terms of, we were trying to figure out how to kind of do our traditional reporting out on it, right, to our stakeholders and executives at the end. And it's like this whole new set of metrics that you've never kind of shared before, which is like, press wanted to talk to Anne Christine at the event, and there were tons of articles that came out about her. And then just kind of that personal, emotional connection that she made with so many people as part of the tour, on the road, and just kind of the goodness that was surrounding all of that. It was beautiful in how it came to life, and beautiful the way it extended into kind of all of these unexpected corners of the world.
And one of the things, you know, even like as far as theaters go, like Lincoln Center is pretty big. It's kind of as big as you can do this kind of event in, but it's still, in the grand scheme of marketing and reach in the world, 3,000 people is tiny. And so one of the things that's always important for us at Pop-Up Magazine is kind of spreading the experience to a much wider audience across social and press. And so because we do this live magazine format, which is unusual and to lots of people kind of a delightful, fun experience, we end up getting a lot of attention from the media. And so when we go on tour with a new Pop-Up Magazine show, we might get 300, 400 million impressions across social from press and people chatting about that. And so as we think about collaborations with brands, we're always looking for ways, like, what can we be doing together that will get the attention of the influencers in our audience? What can we do to get the attention of the press that is covering the shows? And this experience with Anne Christine was kind of like the home run hit of that.
Yeah,
Advertising Week came backstage with us and filmed some of the contributors from Pop-Up Magazine and Anne Christine for one of their kind of video profiles on their site, and it was wonderful for us. They were as excited about what we're doing in our brand collaborations as they are any other story in the show.
It was awesome.
Do you want to say something about the Agoraphobic Traveler film, and then I can?
Sure, I'm scooping the show that's live now. Is that okay?
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's okay.
Okay. So we are part of the fall tour, which, as Chaz mentioned, you can get tickets for here in New York in the next couple of weeks. So Jackie Kenny is another one of our the folks that we've featured in our Search On series. She's a woman that lives in London who experiences agoraphobia. And so for her, she has a lot of anxiety around leaving her apartment, but kind of at her core, she's a photographer. And obviously those two things were in conflict for her, wanting to see the world and wanting to take all of these amazing photos. And at the same time, really kind of feeling bound to one place. So one day she opened up Google Maps and Google Street View, and she started exploring all over the world, South America, Central America, Europe, et cetera, just straight through Google Street View. And she started taking screen captures that she would then edit and put up on Instagram. Instagram. So if you look up Street View Portraits, this is Jackie right here. She has this amazing collection. I want to say she's taken, I think, 6,000 photos using Google Street View of just completely unexpected, like beautiful kind of little corners of the world that you never would have expected. So her story comes to life, and I've scooped it a little bit, but it comes to life in the fall show, and it's a really beautiful moment.
And as we, this is like a little photo essay that is in California Sunday of some of the work that she's done. So she's not actually going out into the world as a photographer, but she's sort of exploring the world and sort of showing the world back to us the way a photographer would. We had so much fun and so much success with Ann-Christine Hertz traveling with us. We're like, oh, let's do that again. But there's a natural limitation in this case, which is the agoraphobia that she experiences it makes it very, very difficult for her to travel. And so we said, how can we kind of create that intimacy and the livification? And so we instead just sent Pop-Up Magazine to her in London. And so we sent a cameraman, and we basically like brought a music stand like she would have been at on the stage of Pop-Up Magazine, but just put it in her living room. And she addresses the crowd in a similarly intimate, personal way at Pop-Up Magazine, but she's just sort of doing it from her home in London. So I before we kick into questions, I just want to wrap with like a couple of statistics. The first one is sort of just that this is like the dumbest, most cliche thing I could probably be saying here, but sort of like great stories get shared. And so the business that we are all in, whether we are publishers making editorial stories, whether we're brands or agency folks making stories on behalf of a brand, the money is in us creating something that is so compelling that we don't have to pay for all of it. And so this live experience that we have at Pop-Up Magazine, it's actually not filmed. So if any of you who haven't been to the show go online like later today, you won't find the filmed version of Pop-Up Magazine. We actually make it for that theater that night. And there's something about that. I hope the quality of the stories is one aspect. I hope the uniqueness is another aspect. I hope the surprise and delight is an aspect. But the ephemeral nature of it signals to the audience that like we made it just for you, that tonight is for you. And that I think is a big contributing factor in the kind of the positive feeling people have after coming to Pop-Up Magazine. So nearly 100% of people say that they loved the show, and next time they're bringing friends or some other version of that kind of statement. And so I think that just like reminding ourselves that it's easier as marketers, it's easier as publishers to like make one thing and then like copy it everywhere. Like make the phone version, make the Instagram version, just like we made it once, push it everywhere. And the truth is we all notice that. We all know when it's sort of factory produced. And so trying to find ways, whether it's through live storytelling or in other ways, finding ways to create that specialness is a way to kind of capture people's attention more deeply. And this is also, we ask questions about sort of the branded content moments in the show, and we do this unaided recall survey after every show, and 97% of the audience is remembering the brands that sponsored the Pop-Up Magazine shows. And these statistics are happening tour after tour after tour for us. And so this idea of like investing in the quality experience, finding people in that story mindset, is a way to just kind of get much more mileage out of the attention from the audience. So with that, you don't need to linger on that. We'd love to open it up to hear from you. Oh, and we're supposed to be using the system. There we go.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Great.
I'll jump on the first one.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So as someone who enjoys content creation from an actor-writer standpoint, what are ways that you, the question asker, as a creator, how do you get more involved in the projects we're working on, I think is the question. I can answer for Pop-Up Magazine. So 3 times a year we put together a new show, kind of a new issue of Pop-Up Magazine that then tours around the country. And in the months leading up to that, we get story pitches from 200, 250 people. We have an open channel, which is stories@popupmagazine.com. where people are pitching us pieces, and so I invite you and encourage you to do that. So our producers are just looking for great stories. They're not looking at resumes to see, what fancy places you write for by day. We're looking for great stories that are about people, that are unexpected, that have beauty and delight and pathos. And so we go through every pitch we see, and out of that 250 or so story pitches, we end up winnowing down to about 15 stories, where our producers are working quite deeply with the story creator to develop the arc and to figure out what else needs to be reported on it. And so for those of you out here who are creatives and have stories to tell, we'd love to hear from you at stories@popupmagazine.com.
Yeah, so for us, I would say maybe find me afterwards and send me an email. We are obviously always looking for different talent really across the board because our stories come to life in so many ways. And so I'm happy to connect you with some of the producers and different folks on our team who are essentially always looking for talent and people who have portfolios that are kind of full of similar storytelling and from an editorial perspective or from a film perspective, et cetera. So we're always kind of looking for more people who have this kind of shared perspective on how to bring stories to life, and would be happy to chat with anyone.
There's a question here about the business model for Pop-Up Magazine. Who's paying what? How do we fill these theaters? So we make money primarily two ways at Pop-Up Magazine. So we sell tickets to the shows. They range from about $30 to $75 a ticket, depending on where you sit. And we then also have sponsor relationships. So in each show, we kind of within the body of the issue itself, we generally have 4 sponsors that are in between editorial stories, and we're getting sponsorship dollars from Google and others to do that. So that's the business model, is sponsorship and ticket sales. And there was also a question about sort of like, how do we fill these theaters? Two things I'll say. One, we're hiring for a head of growth marketing, so accepting resumes. To date, we have mostly grown organically. So the first Pop-Up Magazine that ever happened was in San Francisco, which is where my business partner and I live. And the first show, it was kind of hard to get people to come to it. It was a little theater in San Francisco, and we invited friends, and we're like, please, we're doing this thing, don't embarrass us. And so we basically got friends to come. And then they saw it. They didn't know what a live magazine might be, but they saw it and said, oh my God, this was great. And so at that very first after party, which was not as fancy as Lincoln Center, we brought 2 kegs to the Brava Theater in San Francisco. And people said, oh my God, now I get it. Now I get what the live magazine is. When's your next one? I'll bring friends. And that, so sort of that happening like physically, like, yo, friends, come with me, let's get some tickets, as well as that happening across social media, has allowed us to kind of go for every other show that we did in San Francisco. We had to triple the size of the venue until we ended up in kind of the Lincoln Center equivalent in San Francisco with 3,000 seats. And tickets were selling basically just based on us sending an email out to our list and those people then telling their friends across social media. And so that's allowed us, as we've started to tour nationally, just because there's so much connective tissue between San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York and DC and Chicago, like the big cities, the audience in one market has told their friends in the other markets to go. As we start branching out into newer markets, so on this tour we're going to San Diego for the first time, we're going to Vancouver for the first time, and we're trying to get smarter about, like, since we don't film the shows, how do we give people enough of a teaser for what it's going to be? How do we explain enough so that they feel like, you know what, I'm going to get a babysitter and make it date night. And we're still trying to figure that out. So resumes, I'd love to meet you. Is there one on this list that you want to?
I can talk about trends from my perspective, at least. So the question is, what trends are you anticipate happening in 2020? And I think this is probably a named one that has already kind of, it actually fits well with this conversation and has already started. And that's that finding opportunities to bring your brand into kind of more intimate settings. I think the opportunity to create these personal connections, to bring your brand into these intimate spaces, that's something that we've really tried to lean into in 2019, and I think again in 2020. I think Pop-Up Magazine was obviously a first opportunity for us to try this. I think as we actually have a full team of journalists who are looking for and discovering these stories for our team. So asking and working with them, kind of starting from a brief perspective of how could we bring this to life in a new way, and then looking for new channels. We kind of look at this spectrum of we have channels that drive reach and really get your story out to a broad groups of people, and then you have Pop-Up Magazine where you have this more emotional connection, and we're kind of constantly thinking along that spectrum and where we can show up. And I think that kind of personal connection, intimate space thing is something that we're hungry to try more of, and hoping that there will be kind of more opportunities and channels for that in the future.
I spent most of my career in digital media. Like I've been a part of some television networks and stuff like that, but I spent a lot of my career at Dig and CNET and Federated Media. And it was interesting even 5 years ago as we started to bring Pop-Up Magazine to cities across the country and start connecting to national brands. And 5 years ago, it was sort of it was a tougher conversation in some ways. They're like, your scale is terrible. You go on tour and it's 15,000 people. I get 4 billion people across my digital plan. And what I've noticed is that digital is great for reach, but there's sort of some remaining lingering questions about how deeply we're engaging with people, and how many are people and how many are robots. And while the technology is getting better and better at understanding this stuff, I think it's still a fundamental problem of engagement, that when we are on our phones, when we're on our computers, we often are doing multiple things at once. And so it's great at transferring information quickly, but it's a tougher medium to achieve depth. And so we've found at Pop-Up Magazine that we've been in more recently, brands are kind of recognizing what you're talking about. That it's like, look, I'm going to do my reach things on television and elsewhere. We're not walking away from that, but I need to engage with the core, and I need to engage with them deeply. So it does seem like the rise of sort of like live experiential connection to a community is a trend on the rise.
Yes, I would say, to use a cliche phrase, both and is really important, and I think we have really trying to lean into those new, more intimate spaces.
Let's see, the biggest challenge faced in your career, like it's a very, very long list. I won't go through the whole part of it. So I'll stay close to home, which is I feel like I'm starting over every time we go on tour and we do our first night performance. One thing that is very different about like publishing on the web or making television or making magazines is like you have all this time to prepare and perfect and lock it down and proof it and get it right before you push it out there into the world. Live does not allow for that. You can do quite a lot of preparation, and we do in advance of the shows, but when you're in that theater and you're playing with the acoustics and how full that theater is, and you're having to work with their lighting rig, the first night we go on tour with a new show is always like it's always a scary experience for those of us at Pop-Up Magazine. I was talking to some folks at Google that said it seemed okay to you, but I'm always much happier on the second night. I think that one of the things that I've learned about live is that you need to be pretty nimble. You need to, like, it may not go exactly as you thought it would go, but so be prepared to adapt to good things or bad things that may happen because it's live and you don't control what 3,000 people want to do. Let's see, is there another good one in here? I can do one quickly. How many, oops. Oh, I have to move, I have to move to the one that moved to the top. How have we collaborated with podcasters and podcasts? At Pop-Up Magazine, that's people that come out of radio or podcasting are always a big part of our show. Because we work with photographers who have beautiful photography to put on the screen, but often need more support and help in terms of building the narrative, building the script. People who are writers tend to be great at the script side of it, but they don't necessarily have an intuition about what kind of illustration or animation might best support their story. And radio and podcast people are actually our favorites to work with, because radio people have to be very good writers. They also have to be very good with timing of, when you're doing radio, particularly radio, but like more sophisticated podcasters do the same thing, where you are kind of the host of a show and you're talking to a guest, and you might be pulling in media and sound files from elsewhere. And so Pop-Up Magazine is really just like a way of live mixing radio with a visual layer to it. And so every show we do has at least one or two radio podcast people in the show, and they're really fun to work with.
That's awesome. Yeah, for us, this is not something that we've done to date, but in a lot of our research and thought process, I think intimate experiences, I think, happen over podcasts, absolutely. I think that's definitely an opportunity for us to kind of lean into, and we haven't quite figured out what that could look like for Google yet, but we know that there's a huge opportunity to connect with people in a different way in the podcast format.
I can give you a quick answer to this first one. How many sponsorships happen per show at Pop-Up Magazine? So the whole show of Pop-Up Magazine, from kind of the opening animation to the closing applause, is about 100 minutes long, and it's generally 10 editorial stories that are between, the shorter ones are maybe 5-6 minutes. The longest we do is usually 9 or 10 minutes, so it's a very tight show. And so there are 10 editorial stories, and in between that, we cap it at 4 sponsor pieces in between that, and those are generally around 2 to 3 minutes that are in between the stories. So that's the number of sponsors inside the show. Inside the broader theater, we also have begun sort of doing sponsorships that aren't on the stage but are happening in the lobby, say with a liquor sponsor, or and we've done some pre-show experiments, almost like movie trailers before a movie would start. So there are 4 in the show, and then we're sort of building around that experience into other ways. I did that one. You have to do the data
I know
one.
now. The data one, I'm happy to talk a little bit about this. So this has really been a collection of kind of data research streams and things like that over the last couple of years for us. So I think Google really started to lean into the brand editorial efforts in the end of 2017, and it's kind of been this 2-year process that we've kind of developed this storytelling mindset that we would consider an approach over the past couple of years. So a lot of it is, specific data that I couldn't share. I couldn't share specific numbers, but I'm happy to connect with folks afterwards if you want to find me, and I can email you some of the broader studies and things like that we've been looking at as part of our research.
And in the minute we have left, are there any other live questions we didn't get to, or thoughts? I can't. Hi.
I was just curious about the sponsorships and bringing that element in. Do you use the same format for the sponsor parts of the show that you use for the rest of the show, where you try to incorporate, multimedia and all of that?
Yeah, so I'll just repeat it for folks in the back. So when we do sponsors inside of Pop-Up Magazine, do we use the same elements and stagecraft that we would for any of the other stories? And the answer to that is yes. So there's, in addition to Google traveling with us on this tour, Chanel is one of the sponsors. And with Chanel, we're working with some organizations that Chanel supports. The Chanel Foundation supports a bunch of really wonderful women-led organizations. And so our studio group worked to develop a story that if you were to plop in on this story, it's being live presented with one of the founders of one of these organizations. There's a live musical score by our band, and there's illustration punctuating the piece. And so it's marked as sponsored content. We're very transparent about that. But in terms of the experience, once you're in it, there aren't 2 classes of experience. That what we do with sponsors is we endeavor for it to be every bit as multimedia, every bit as engaging and surprising and delightful as anything else in the show. I think there's a question up there.
Thank you. Yeah. You mentioned that in 2020, the trends that, with regards to intimate settings and brands connecting with people in more intimate settings, outside of what you've mentioned today, including Pop-Up Magazine and podcasts, what other platforms have you come across with regards to that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of create more platforms and channels there. I think it's definitely, there are a few key ones that we've leaned into. So as I mentioned, we're definitely trying to understand, what a different or what an opportunity could be in the podcast space, but nothing specific there. Another one that we're interested in, we're also trying, is cinema. So how could we do kind of a more classic traditional cinema buy, which sounds a little bit old school, but I think you actually get more of a captured attention within that experience. So that's something that we're experimenting with this fall. And honestly, just kind of looking for more opportunities like that. So if you have any, that it's definitely something that we're evaluating right now and looking for more ways to lean in that way.
So, well, thank you. I think we're supposed to wrap up here. So if those of you who are interested in Pop-Up Magazine and seeing the magic stuff that we do together around the Search On films, we're going to be at Lincoln Center Thursday, October 10th, so coming up in a couple weeks. And there's a discount code on this slide here, so you can get cheaper tickets if you're interested. Do you have a couple minutes? We'll wrap this up, but if you any other questions, we're hanging around for a bit. Thank you all for having us.
Thank you.